Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read-aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of The Last Man by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, published in 1826. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 4, Episode 54. A quick content warning. This book contains occasional references to plague, pestilence, death, suicidal thoughts and actions, and in one section, brief descriptions of war and pillaging. We will try to include specific warnings in the episode descriptions, but if you prefer to avoid these topics altogether, we recommend re-listening to our previous seasons or rejoining us for our next book. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you have a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, it would help other listeners find us. You can also hear our episodes on YouTube. If you are listening there, please like our episodes and leave a comment for us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Chapter 2. On my arrival, I found that an order had already gone forth for the army to proceed immediately towards Constantinople, and the troops which had suffered least in the battle were already on their way. The town was full of tumult. The wound and consequent inability of Argyropilo caused Raymond to be the first in command. He rode through the town, visiting the wounded, giving such orders as were necessary for the siege he meditated. Early in the morning, the whole army was in motion. In the hurry, I could hardly find an opportunity to bestow the last offices on Evgeni. Attended only by my servant, I dug a deep grave for her at the foot of the tree, and without disturbing her warrior shroud, I placed her in it, heaping stones upon the grave. The dazzling sun and glare of daylight deprived the scene of solemnity. From Evgeni's low tomb, I joined Raymond and his staff, now on their way to the Golden City. Constantinople was invested, trenches dug, and advances made. The whole Greek fleet blockaded it by sea. On land, from the river near the sweet waters to the Tower of Marmara, on the shores of Propontis, along the whole line of the ancient walls, the trenches of the siege were drawn. We already possessed Pera, the Golden Horn itself, the city bastioned by the sea, and the ivy-mantled walls of the Greek emperors was all of Europe that the Turks could call theirs. Our army looked on her as certain prey. They counted the garrison. It was impossible that it should be relieved. Each sally was a victory, for, even when they were triumphant, the loss of men they sustained was an irreparable injury. I rode one morning with Raymond to the lofty mound, not far from the top Kapu, on which Mahmud planted his standard and first saw the city. Still the same lofty domes and minarets towered above the verdurous walls where Constantine had died and the Turk had entered the city. The plain around was interspersed with cemeteries, Turk, Greek, and Armenian, with their growth of cypress trees, and other woods of more cheerful aspect diversified the scene. Among them the Greek army was encamped, and their squadrons moved to and fro, now in regular march, now in swift career. Raymond's eyes were fixed on the city. "I have counted the hours of her life," said he. "1 month, and she falls. Remain with me till then. Wait till you see the cross on Saint Sophia, and then return to your peaceful glades." "You then," I asked, "still remain in Greece?" "Assuredly," replied Raymond. "Yet, Lionel, when I say this, believe me, I look back with regret to our tranquil life at Windsor. I am but half a soldier. I love the renown, but not the trade of war. Before the battle of Rodosto, I was full of hope and spirit. To conquer there, and afterwards to take Constantinople, was the hope, the bourne, the fulfillment of my ambition. This enthusiasm is now spent, I know not why. I seem to myself to be entering a darksome gulf. The ardent spirit of the army is irksome to me, the rapture of triumph null." He paused and was lost in thought. His serious mien recalled, by association, the half-forgotten Evgeni to my mind, and I seized this opportunity to make enquiries from him concerning her strange lot. I asked him if he had ever seen among the troops any one resembling her, if, since he had returned to Greece, he had heard of her. He started at her name. He looked uneasily on me. "Even so," he cried, "I knew you would speak of her. Long, long I had forgotten her. Since our encampment here, she daily, hourly visits my thoughts. When I am addressed, her name is the sound I expect. In every communication, I imagine that she will form a part. At length you have broken the spell. Tell me what you know of her." I related my meeting with her. The story of her death was told and retold. With painful earnestness, he questioned me concerning her prophecies with regard to him. I treated them as the ravings of a maniac. "No, no," he said, "do not deceive yourself. Me you cannot. She has said nothing but what I knew before, though this is confirmation. Fire, the sword, and plague, they may all be found in yonder city. On my head alone may they fall." From this day, Raymond's melancholy increased. He secluded himself as much as the duties of his station permitted. When in company, sadness would, in spite of every effort, steal over his features, and he sat absent and mute among the busy crowd that thronged about him. Perdita rejoined him, and before her he forced himself to appear cheerful, for she, even as a mirror, changed as he changed, and if he were silent and anxious, she solicitously inquired concerning and endeavored to remove the cause of his seriousness. She resided at the Palace of Sweet Waters, a summer seraglio of the Sultan. The beauty of the surrounding scenery, undefiled by war, and the freshness of the river made this spot doubly delightful. Raymond felt no relief, received no pleasure from any show of heaven or earth. He often left Perdita to wander in the grounds alone, or in a light shallop he floated idly on the pure waters, musing deeply. Sometimes I joined him. At such times his countenance was invariably solemn, his air dejected. He seemed relieved on seeing me, and would talk with some degree of interest on the affairs of the day. There was evidently something behind all this. Yet, When he appeared about to speak of that which was nearest his heart, he would abruptly turn away, and with a sigh endeavor to deliver the painful idea to the winds. It had often occurred that when, as I said, Raymond quitted Perdita's drawing-room, Clara came up to me and, gently drawing me aside, said, "Papa is gone. Shall we go to him? I dare say he will be glad to see you." And, as accident permitted, I complied with or refused her request. One evening, a numerous assembly of Greek chieftains were gathered together in the palace. The intriguing Pali, the accomplished Carazza, the warlike Ypsilanti were among the principal. They talked of the events of the day, the skirmish at noon, the diminished numbers of the infidels, their defeat and flight. They contemplated, after a short interval of time, the capture of the Golden City. They endeavored to picture forth what would then happen, and spoke in lofty terms of the prosperity of Greece when Constantinople should become its capital. The conversation then reverted to Asiatic intelligence and the ravages the plague made in its chief cities. Conjectures were hazarded as to the progress that disease might have made in the besieged city. Raymond had joined in the former part of the discussion. In lively terms he demonstrated the extremities to which Constantinople was reduced. The wasted and haggard, though ferocious, appearance of the troops. Famine and pestilence was at work for them, he observed, and the Turks would soon be obliged to take refuge in their only hope, submission. Suddenly, in the midst of his harangue, he broke off, as if stung by some painful thought. He rose uneasily, and I perceived him at length quit the hall, and, through the long corridor, seek the open air. He did not return, and soon Clara crept round to me, making the accustomed invitation. I consented to her request, and taking her little hand, followed Raymond. We found him just about to embark in his boat, and he readily agreed to receive us as companions. After the heats of the day, the cooling land breeze ruffled the river and filled our little sail. The city looked dark to the south, while numerous lights along the near shores, and the beautiful aspect of the banks reposing in placid night, the waters keenly reflecting the heavenly lights, gave to this beauteous river a dower of loveliness that might have characterized a retreat in paradise. Our single boatman attended to the sail, and Raymond steered, Clara at his feet, clasping his knees with her arms and laying her head on them. Raymond began the conversation somewhat abruptly. "This, my friend, is probably the last time we shall have an opportunity of conversing freely. My plans are now in full operation, and my time will become more and more occupied. Besides, I wish at once to tell you my wishes and expectations, and then never again to revert to so painful a subject. First, I must thank you, Lionel, for having remained here at my request. Vanity first prompted me to ask you. Vanity I call it, yet even in this I see the hand of fate. Your presence will soon be necessary. You will become the last resource of Perdita, her protector and consoler. You will take her back to Windsor." "Not without you," I said. "You do not mean to separate again." "Do not deceive yourself," replied Raymond. "The separation at hand is one over which I have no control. Most near at hand is it. The days are already counted. May I trust you? For many days I have longed to disclose the mysterious presentiments that weigh on me, although I fear that you will ridicule them. Yet do not, my gentle friend, For all childish and unwise as they are, they have become a part of me, and I dare not expect to shake them off. Yet how can I expect you to sympathize with me? You are of this world, I am not. You hold forth your hand, it is even as a part of yourself, and you do not yet divide the feeling of identity from the mortal form that shapes forth Lionel. How then can you understand me? Earth is to me a tomb, the firmament a vault, shrouding mere corruption. Time is no more, for I have stepped within the threshold of eternity. Each man I meet appears a corpse, which will soon be deserted of its animating spark on the eve of decay and corruption. Cada pietra un piramide levanta, y cada flor construye un monumento. Cada edificio es un sepulcro altivo. Cada soldado un esqueleto vivo. End quote from Calderone de la Barca. His accent was mournful. He sighed deeply. A few months ago, he continued, I was thought to be dying, but life was strong within me. My affections were human. Hope and love were the day stars of my life. Now they dream that the brows of the conqueror are about to be encircled by triumphant laurel. They talk of honorable reward, of title, power, and wealth. All I ask of Greece is a grave. Let them raise a mound above my lifeless body, which may stand even when the dome of St. Sophia has fallen. Wherefore do I feel thus? At Radosto I was full of hope, but when first I saw Constantinople, that feeling, with every other joyful one, departed. The last words of Evgeni were the seal upon the warrant of my death. Yet I do not pretend to account for my mood by any particular event. All I can say is that it is so. The plague, I am told, is in Constantinople. Perhaps I have imbibed its effluvia. Perhaps disease is the real cause of my prognostications. It matters little why or wherefore I am affected. No power can avert the stroke, and the shadow of fate's uplifted hand already darkens me. To you, Lionel, I entrust your sister and her child. Never mention to her the fatal name of Evgeni. She would doubly sorrow over the strange link that enchains me to her, making my spirit obey her dying voice, following her as it is about to do to the unknown country. I listened to him with wonder, but that his sad demeanor and solemn utterance assured me of the truth and intensity of his feelings, I should with light derision have attempted to dissipate his fears. Whatever I was about to reply was interrupted by the powerful emotions of Clara. Raymond had spoken, thoughtless of her presence, and she, poor child, heard with terror and faith the prophecy of his death. Her father was moved by her violent grief. He took her in his arms and soothed her, but his very soothings were solemn and fearful. Weep not, sweet child, said he, the coming death of one you have hardly known. I may die, but in death I can never forget or desert my own Clara. In after sorrow or joy, believe that your father's spirit is near to save or sympathize with you. Be proud of me, and cherish your infant remembrance of me. Thus, sweetest, I shall not appear to die. One thing you must promise, not to speak to anyone but your uncle of the conversation you have just overheard. When I am gone, you will console your mother and tell her that death was only bitter because it divided me from her, that my last thoughts will be spent on her. But while I live, promise not to betray me. Promise, my child." With faltering accents, Clara promised, while she still clung to her father in a transport of sorrow. Soon we returned to shore, and I endeavored to obviate the impression made on the child's mind by treating Raymond's fears lightly. We heard no more of them, for, as he had said, the siege, now drawing to a conclusion, became paramount in interest, engaging all his time and attention. The empire of the Turks in Europe was at its close. The Greek fleet blockading every port of Stamboul prevented the arrival of succor from Asia. All egress on the side towards land had become impracticable, except to such desperate sallies as reduced the numbers of the enemy without making any impression on our lines. The garrison was now so much diminished that it was evident that the city could easily have been carried by storm, but both humanity and policy dictated a slower mode of proceeding. We could hardly doubt that, if pursued to the utmost, its palaces, its temples, and store of wealth would be destroyed in the fury of contending triumph and defeat. Already the defenseless citizens had suffered through the barbarity of the Janissaries, and, in time of storm, tumult, and massacre, beauty, infancy, and decrepitude would have alike been sacrificed to the brutal ferocity of the soldiers. Famine and blockade were certain means of conquest, and on these we founded our hopes of victory. Each day the soldiers of the garrison assaulted our advanced posts and impeded the accomplishment of our works. Fire-boats were launched from the various ports, while our troops sometimes recoiled from the devoted courage of men who did not seek to live, but to sell their lives dearly. These contests were aggravated by the season. They took place during summer, when the southern Asiatic wind came laden with intolerable heat, when the streams were dried up in their shallow beds, and the vast basin of the sea appeared to glow under the unmitigated rays of the solstitial sun. Nor did night refresh the earth. Dew was denied, herbage and flowers there were none, the very trees drooped, and summer assumed the blighted appearance of winter, as it went forth in silence and flame to abridge the means of sustenance to man. In vain did the eye strive to find the wreck of some northern cloud in the stainless empyrean, which might bring hope of change and moisture to the oppressive and windless atmosphere. All was serene, burning, annihilating. We, the besiegers, were, in the comparison, little affected by these evils. The woods around afforded us shade. The river secured to us a constant supply of water. Nay, detachments were employed in furnishing the army with ice, which had been laid up on Haemus and Athos and the mountains of Macedonia, while cooling fruits and wholesome food renovated the strength of the laborers and made us bear with less impatience the weight of the unrefreshing air. But in the city things wore a different face. The sun's rays were refracted from the pavement and buildings. The stoppage of the public fountains, the bad quality of the food, and scarcity even of that, produced a state of suffering which was aggravated by the scourge of disease, while the garrison arrogated every superfluity to themselves, adding by waste and riot to the necessary evils of the time. Still they would not capitulate. Suddenly the system of warfare was changed. We experienced no more assaults, and by night and day we continued our labors unimpeded. Stranger still, when the troops advanced near the city, the walls were vacant, and no cannon was pointed against the intruders. When these circumstances were reported to Raymond, he caused minute observations to be made as to what was doing within the walls, and when his scouts returned, reporting only the continued silence and desolation of the city, he commanded the army to be drawn out before the gates. No one appeared on the walls. The very portals, though locked and barred, seemed unguarded. Above, the many domes and glittering crescents pierced heaven, while the old walls, survivors of ages, with ivy-crowned tower and weed-tangled buttress, stood as rocks in an uninhabited waste. From within the city, neither shout nor cry, nor aught except the casual howling of a dog, broke the noonday stillness. Even our soldiers were awed to silence. The music paused, the clang of arms was hushed. Each man asked his fellow in whispers the meaning of this sudden peace, while Raymond from a height endeavored, by means of glasses, to discover and observe the stratagem of the enemy. No form could be discerned on the terraces of the houses. In the higher parts of the town, no moving shadow bespoke the presence of any living being. The very trees waved not, and mocked the stability of architecture with like immovability. The tramp of horses, distinctly heard in the silence, was at length discerned. It was a troop sent by Carazza, the admiral. They bore dispatches to the Lord General. The contents of these papers were important. The night before, the watch, on board one of the smaller vessels anchored near the Seraglio wall, was roused by a slight splashing as of muffled oars. The alarm was given. 12 small boats, each containing 3 janissaries, were descried endeavoring to make their way through the fleet to the opposite shore of Scutari. When they found themselves discovered, they discharged their muskets, and some came to the front to cover the others, whose crews, exerting all their strength, endeavored to escape with their light barks from among the dark hulls that environed them. They were in the end all sunk, and, with the exception of 2 or 3 prisoners, the crews drowned. Little could be got from the survivors, but their cautious answers caused it to be surmised that several expeditions had preceded this last, and that several Turks of rank and importance had been conveyed to Asia. The men disdainfully repelled the idea of having deserted the defense of their city, and one, the youngest among them, in answer to the taunt of a sailor, exclaimed, "Take it, Christian dogs! Take the palaces, the gardens, the mosques, the abode of our fathers. Take plague with them. Pestilence is the enemy we fly. If she be your friend, hug her to your bosoms." Such was the account sent by Carazza to Raymond, but a tale full of monstrous exaggerations, though founded on this, was spread by the accompanying troop among our soldiers. A murmur arose. The city was the prey of pestilence. Already had a mighty power subjugated the inhabitants. Death had become lord of Constantinople. I have heard a picture described, wherein all the inhabitants of earth were drawn out in fear to stand the encounter of death. The feeble and decrepit fled. The warriors retreated, though they threatened even in flight. Wolves and lions and various monsters of the desert roared against him, while the grim unreality hovered shaking his spectral dart, a solitary but invincible assailant. Even so was it with the army of Greece. I am convinced that had the myriad troops of Asia come from over the Propontis and stood defenders of the Golden City, each and every Greek would have marched against the overwhelming numbers and have devoted himself with patriotic fury for his country. But here no hedge of bayonets opposed itself, no death-dealing artillery, no formidable array of brave soldiers. The unguarded walls afforded easy entrance, the vacant palaces luxurious dwellings. But above the dome of St. Sophia the superstitious Greek saw pestilence and shrunk in trepidation from her influence. Raymond was actuated by far other feelings. He descended the hill with a face beaming with triumph, and pointing with his sword to the gates, commanded his troops to "down with those barricades," the only obstacles now to completest victory. The soldiers answered his cheerful words with aghast and awestruck looks. Instinctively they drew back, and Raymond rode in the front of the lines. "By my sword I swear," he cried, "that no ambush or stratagem endangers you. The enemy is already vanquished. The pleasant places, the noble dwellings, and spoil of the city are already yours. Force the gate, enter and possess the seats of your ancestors, your own inheritance." A universal shudder and fearful whispering passed through the lines. Not a soldier moved. "Cowards!" exclaimed their general, exasperated. "Give me a hatchet. I alone will enter. I will plant your standard, and when you see it wave from yon highest minaret, you may gain courage and rally round it." One of the officers now came forward. "General," he said, "we neither fear the courage nor arms, the open attack nor secret ambush. We are ready to expose our breasts, exposed 10,000 times before, to the balls and scimitars of the infidels, and to fall gloriously for Greece. But we will not die in heaps, like dogs poisoned in summertime by the pestilential air of that city. We dare not go against the plague. A multitude of men are feeble and inert, without a voice, a leader. Give them that, and they regain the strength belonging to their numbers." Shouts from 1,000 voices now rent the air. The cry of applause became universal. Raymond saw the danger. He was willing to save his troops from the crime of disobedience, for he knew that contention once begun between the commander and his army, each act and word added to the weakness of the former and bestowed power on the latter. He gave orders for the retreat to be sounded, and the regiments repaired in good order to the camp. I hastened to carry the intelligence of these strange proceedings to Perdita, and we were soon joined by Raymond. He looked gloomy and perturbed. My sister was struck by my narrative. "How beyond the imagination of man," she exclaimed, "are the decrees of heaven, wondrous and inexplicable." "Foolish girl," cried Raymond angrily, "are you like my valiant soldiers, panic-struck? What is there inexplicable, pray tell me, in so very natural an occurrence? Does not the plague rage each year in Stamboul? What wonder that this year, when, as we are told, its virulence is unexampled in Asia, that it should have occasioned double havoc in that city? What wonder, then, in time of siege, want, extreme heat, and drought, that it should make unaccustomed ravages? Less wonder far is it that the garrison, despairing of being able to hold out longer, should take advantage of the negligence of our fleet to escape at once from siege and capture. It is not pestilence. By the God that lives, it is not either plague or impending danger that makes us, like birds in harvest time, terrified by a scarecrow, abstain from the ready prey. It is base superstition. And thus the aim of the valiant is made the shuttlecock of fools, the worthy ambition of the high-souled, the plaything of these tamed hares. But yet Stamboul shall be ours, by my past labors, by torture and imprisonment suffered for them, by my victories, by my sword, I swear, by my hopes of fame, by my former deserts now awaiting their reward, I deeply vow, with these hands, to plant the standard on yonder mosque." "Dearest Raymond," interrupted Perdita in a supplicating accent. He had been walking to and fro in the marble hall of the seraglio. His very lips were pale with rage, while, quivering, they shaped his angry words. His eyes shot fire. His gestures seemed restrained by their very vehemence. "Perdita," he continued impatiently, "I know what you would say. I know that you love me, that you are good and gentle, but this is no woman's work, nor can a female heart guess at the hurricane which tears me." He seemed half afraid of his own violence, and suddenly quitted the hall. A look from Perdita showed me her distress, and I followed him. He was pacing the garden. His passions were in a state of inconceivable turbulence. "Am I forever," he cried, "to be the sport of fortune? Must man, the heaven climber, be forever the victim of the crawling reptiles of his species? Were I as you, Lionel, looking forward to many years of life, to a succession of love-enlightened days, to refined enjoyments and fresh-springing hopes, I might yield, and, breaking my general's staff, seek repose in the glades of Windsor. But I am about to die. Nay, interrupt me not. Soon I shall die. From the many-peopled earth, from the sympathies of man, from the loved resorts of my youth, from the kindness of my friends, from the affection of my only beloved, Perdita, I am about to be removed. Such is the will of fate, such the decree of the high ruler from whom there is no appeal, to whom I submit. But to lose all, to lose with life and love, glory also, it shall not be. I, and in a few brief years all you, this panic-struck army, and all the population of fair Greece, will no longer be, but other generations will arise, and ever and forever will continue to be made happier by our present acts, to be glorified by our valor. The prayer of my youth was to be one among those who render the pages of earth's history splendid, who exalt the race of man, and make this little globe a dwelling of the mighty. Alas for Raymond, the power of his youth is wasted, the hopes of his manhood are null. From my dungeon in yonder city I cried, Soon I will be thy lord. When Evgeni pronounced my death, I thought that the title of Victor of Constantinople would be written on my tomb, and I subdued all mortal fear. I stand before its vanquished walls and dare not call myself a conqueror. So shall it not be. Did not Alexander leap from the walls of the city of the Oxydrace to show his coward troops the way to victory, encountering alone the swords of its defenders? Even so will I brave the plague, and though no man follow, I will plant the Grecian standard on the height of St. Sophia. Reason came unavailing to such high-wrought feelings. In vain I showed him that when winter came the cold would dissipate the pestilential air and restore courage to the Greeks. Talk not of other season than this, he cried. I have lived my last winter, and the date of this year, 2092, will be carved upon my tomb. Already do I see, he continued, looking up mournfully, the born and precipitate edge of my existence, over which I plunge into the gloomy mystery of the life to come. I am prepared, so that I leave behind a trail of light so radiant that my worst enemies cannot cloud it. I owe this to Greece, to you, to my surviving Perdita, and to myself, the victim of ambition." We were interrupted by an attendant who announced that the staff of Raymond was assembled in the council chamber. He requested me in the meantime to ride through the camp and to observe and report to him the dispositions of the soldiers. He then left me. I had been excited to the utmost by the proceedings of the day, and now more than ever by the passionate language of Raymond. Alas for human reason! He accused the Greeks of superstition. What name did he give to the faith he lent to the predictions of Evgeni? I passed from the palace of sweet waters to the plain on which the encampment lay, and found its inhabitants in commotion. The arrival of several with fresh stories of marvels from the fleet, the exaggerations bestowed on what was already known, tales of old prophecies, of fearful histories of whole regions which had been laid waste during the present year by pestilence, alarmed and occupied the troops. Discipline was lost, the army disbanded itself. Each individual, before a part of a great whole, moving only in unison with others, now became resolved into the unit nature had made him, and thought of himself only. They stole off at first by ones and twos, then in larger companies, until, unimpeded by the officers, whole battalions sought the road that led to Macedonia. About midnight I returned to the palace and sought Raymond. He was alone and apparently composed. Such composure, at least, was his as is inspired by a resolve to adhere to a certain line of conduct. He heard my account of the self-dissolution of the army with calmness, and then said, "You know, Verney, my fixed determination not to quit this place until in the light of day Stamboul is confessedly ours. If the men I have about me shrink from following me, others, more courageous, are to be found. Go you before break of day, bear these dispatches to Karatza. Add to them your own entreaties that he send me his marines and naval force. If I can get but one regiment to second me, the rest would follow, of course. Let him send me this regiment. I shall expect your return by tomorrow noon." Methought this was but a poor expedient, but I assured him of my obedience and zeal. I quitted him to take a few hours' rest. With the breaking of morning, I was accoutred for my ride. I lingered a while, desirous of taking leave of Perdita, and from my window observed the approach of the sun. The golden splendor arose, and weary nature awoke to suffer yet another day of heat and thirsty decay. No flowers lifted up their dew-laden cups to meet the dawn. The dry grass had withered on the plains. The burning fields of air were vacant of birds. The cicala alone, children of the sun, began their shrill and deafening song among the cypresses and olives. I saw Raymond's coal-black charger brought to the palace gate. A small company of officers arrived soon after. Care and fear was painted on each cheek and in each eye, unrefreshed by sleep. I found Raymond and Perdita together. He was watching the rising sun, while with one arm he encircled his beloved's waist. She looked on him, the son of her life, with earnest gaze of mingled anxiety and tenderness. Raymond started angrily when he saw me. "Here still?" he cried. "Is this your promised zeal?" "Pardon me," I said, "but even as you speak, I am gone." "Nay, pardon me," he replied. "I have no right to command or reproach, but my life hangs on your departure and speedy return. Farewell." His voice had recovered its bland tone, but a dark cloud still hung on his features. I would have delayed. I wished to recommend watchfulness to Perdita, but his presence restrained me. I had no pretense for my hesitation, and on his repeating his farewell, I clasped his outstretched hand. It was cold and clammy. "Take care of yourself, my dear lord," I said. "Nay," said Perdita, "that task shall be mine. Return speedily, Lionel." With an air of absence he was playing with her auburn locks, while she leaned on him. Twice I turned back, only to look again on this matchless pair. At last, with slow and heavy steps, I had paced out of the hall and sprung upon my horse. At that moment Clara flew towards me. Clasping my knee, she cried, "Make haste back, uncle. Dear uncle, I have such fearful dreams. I dare not tell my mother. Do not be long away." I assured her of my impatience to return, and then, with a small escort, rode along the plain towards the Tower of Marmora. I fulfilled my commission. I saw Carazza. He was somewhat surprised. He would see, he said, what could be done, but it required time, and Raymond had ordered me to return by noon. It was impossible to effect anything in so short a time. I must stay till the next day, or come back after having reported the present state of things to the general. My choice was easily made. A restlessness, a fear of what was about to betide, a doubt as to Raymond's purposes, urged me to return without delay to his quarters. Quitting the 7 Towers, I rode eastward towards the Sweet Waters. I took a circuitous path, principally for the sake of going to the top of the mount before mentioned, which commanded a view of the city. I had my glass with me. The city basked under the noonday sun, and the venerable walls formed its picturesque boundary. Trees, gigantic and aged, grew near. Before the gate I discerned a crowd of moving human figures. With intense curiosity I lifted my glass to my eye. I saw Lord Raymond on his charger. A small company of officers had gathered about him, and behind was a promiscuous concourse of soldiers and subalterns, their discipline lost, their arms thrown aside. No music sounded, no banners streamed. The only flag among them was the one which Raymond carried. He pointed with it to the gate of the city. The circle round him fell back. With angry gestures he leapt from his horse, and seizing a hatchet that hung from his saddle-bow, went with the apparent intention of battering down the opposing gate. A few men came to aid him. Their numbers increased. Under their united blows the obstacle was vanquished. Gate, portcullis, and fence were demolished, and the wide sunlit way, leading to the heart of the city, now lay open before them. The men shrank back. They seemed afraid of what they had already done, and stood as if they expected some mighty phantom to stalk in offended majesty from the opening. Raymond sprung lightly on his horse, grasped the standard, and with words which I could not hear, but his gestures, being their fit accompaniment, were marked by passionate energy, he seemed to adjure their assistance and companionship. Even as he spoke, the crowd receded from him. Indignation now transported him. His words, I guessed, were fraught with disdain. Then turning from his coward followers, he addressed himself to enter the city alone. His very horse seemed to back from the fatal entrance. His dog, his faithful dog, lay moaning and supplicating in his path. In a moment more, he had bounded forward, and the gateway passed, was galloping up the broad and deserted street. Until this moment my soul had been in my eyes only. I had gazed with wonder mixed with fear and enthusiasm. The latter feeling now predominated. I forgot the distance between us. "I will go with thee, Raymond," I cried, but my eye removed from the glass, I could scarce discern the pygmy forms of the crowd which about a mile from me surrounded the gate. The form of Raymond was lost. Stung with impatience, I urged my horse with force of spur and loosened reins down the acclivity that, before danger could arrive, I might be at the side of my noble, godlike friend. A number of buildings and trees intervened when I had reached the plain, hiding the city from my view. But at that moment a crash was heard. Thunder like it reverberated through the sky, while the air was darkened. A moment more, and the old walls again met my sight, while over them hovered a murky cloud. Fragments of buildings whirled above, half seen in smoke, while flames burst out underneath, and continued explosions filled the air with terrific thunders. Flying from the mass of falling ruin which leapt over the high walls and shook the ivy towers, a crowd of soldiers made for the road by which I came. I was surrounded, hemmed in by them, unable to get forward. My impatience rose to its utmost. I stretched out my hands to the men. I conjured them to turn back and save their general, the conqueror of Stamboul, the liberator of Greece. Tears, tears, in warm flow gushed from my eyes. I would not believe in his destruction. Horrible sights were shaped to me in the turbid cloud that hovered over the city, and my only relief was derived from the struggles I made to approach the gate. Yet when I effected my purpose, all I could discern within the precincts of the massive walls was a city of fire. The open way through which Raymond had ridden was enveloped in smoke and flame. After an interval the explosions ceased, but the flames still shot up from various quarters. The dome of St. Sophia had disappeared. Strange to say, the result perhaps of the concussion of air occasioned by the blowing up of the city. Huge white thunderclouds lifted themselves up from the southern horizon and gathered overhead. They were the first blots on the blue expanse that I had seen for months, and amidst this havoc and despair they inspired pleasure. The vault above became obscured. Lightning flashed from the heavy masses, followed instantaneously by crashing thunder. Then the big rain fell. The flames of the city bent beneath it, and the smoke and dust arising from the ruins was dissipated. I no sooner perceived an abatement of the flames than, hurried on by an irresistible impulse, I endeavored to penetrate the town. I could only do this on foot, as the mass of ruin was impracticable for a horse. I had never entered the city before, and its ways were unknown to me. The streets were blocked up, the ruins smoking. I climbed up one heap, only to view others in succession, and nothing told me where the center of the town might be, or towards what point Raymond might have directed his course. The rain ceased, the clouds sunk behind the horizon. It was now evening, and the sun descended swiftly the western sky. I scrambled on until I came to a street whose wooden houses, half burnt, had been cooled by the rain and were fortunately uninjured by the gunpowder. Up this I hurried. Until now I had not seen a vestige of man. Yet none of the defaced human forms which I distinguished could be Raymond. So I turned my eyes away, while my heart sickened within me. I came to an open space, a mountain of ruin in the midst, announced that some large mosque had occupied the space, and here, scattered about, I saw various articles of luxury and wealth, singed, destroyed, but showing what they had been in their ruin. Jewels, strings of pearls, embroidered robes, rich furs, and glittering tapestries seemed to have been collected here in a pile destined for destruction, but the rain had stopped the havoc midway. Hours passed while in this scene of ruin I sought for Raymond. Insurmountable heaps sometimes opposed themselves. The still burning fires scorched me. The sun set, the atmosphere grew dim, and the evening star no longer shone companionless. The glare of flames attested the progress of destruction, while, during mingled light and obscurity, the piles around me took gigantic proportions and weird shapes. For a moment I could yield to the creative power of the imagination, and for a moment was soothed by the sublime fictions it presented to me. The beatings of my human heart drew me back to blank reality. Where, in this wilderness of death, art thou, O Raymond, ornament of England, deliverer of Greece, hero of unwritten story? Where in this burning chaos are thy dear relics strewed? I called aloud for him. Through the darkness of night, over the scorching ruins of fallen Constantinople, his name was heard. No voice replied. Echo even was mute. I was overcome by weariness. The solitude depressed my spirits. The sultry air impregnated with dust, the heat and smoke of burning palaces palsied my limbs. Hunger suddenly came acutely upon me. The excitement which had hitherto sustained me was lost. As a building whose props are loosened and whose foundations rock, totters and falls, so when enthusiasm and hope deserted me, did my strength fail. I sat on the sole remaining step of an edifice which even in its downfall was huge and magnificent. A few broken walls, not dislodged by gunpowder, stood in fantastic groups, and a flame glimmered at intervals on the summit of the pile. For a time hunger and sleep contended, till the constellations reeled before my eyes and then were lost. I strove to rise, but my heavy lids closed, my limbs overwearied claimed repose. I rested my head on the stone. I yielded to the grateful sensation of utter forgetfulness, and in that scene of desolation, on that night of despair, I slept. Stay tuned for the next segment from The Last Man by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Van Zaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find many interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.